The afternoon sun stretched lazily across the sky, painting the horizon in warm shades of gold and orange. Daniel's car hummed quietly as he drove down the long country road, the tires crunching against gravel and dust. He hadn't been here in years, not since high school. The familiar scenery brought back a flood of memories, but at the same time, it all felt different. Maybe it was him who had changed. He pulled up in front of the old two-story house. The place hadn't aged much, at least not from the outside. The wooden siding was freshly painted, the flower beds were alive with color, and the porch still carried that nostalgic charm. A cool breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves like whispers. Daniel killed the engine and sat for a moment, his hands still gripping the wheel. He let out a slow breath, his stomach tightening with a nervous anticipation he couldn't quite explain. This was supposed to be simple, just a summer visit. His best friend had invited him to stay for a few weeks, to relax, hang out, and maybe escape the pressure of everything waiting for him back home. But the moment he stepped out of the car and set foot on the gravel path, a strange awareness prickled at the back of his neck. The wooden porch creaked under his sneakers as he climbed the steps. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door swung open. And there she was, his best friend's mother. For a second, Daniel forgot how to breathe. She looked nothing like the way he remembered her. Time had been impossibly kind to her, or maybe it had transformed her in ways he hadn't noticed as a boy. Now, standing there in the doorway, she was captivating. Her golden hair cascaded loosely over her shoulders, catching the light like strands of silk. She wore a casual white blouse, simple yet elegant, its fabric soft against her skin and hinting at the curve of her figure. Her eyes met his, warm and piercing all at once, and then she smiled. "Daniel," she said, her voice rich, smooth, and threaded with a playful surprise. "My goodness, it's been years." Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to say something clever, something casual, but the words caught in his throat. His hand rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he hadn't managed to outgrow. Hi," he finally managed, his voice cracking just slightly. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to linger in the air longer than it should have. "Well, don't just stand there, honey. Come in." She stepped aside, holding the door open with a graceful sweep of her arm. Daniel walked inside, his sneakers brushing against the welcome mat. The familiar scent of the house hit him immediately. Freshly brewed coffee, polished wood, and something faintly floral. It was the same house he remembered, yet everything felt sharper now, more alive. The living room opened up before him. The same couch sat against the wall, though now decorated with new throw pillows. Family pictures lined the mantel, though most of them were of his friends' school graduations, sports trophies, group photos. But Daniel's eyes weren't on the photos. They kept drifting back to her. She closed the door behind him, and when she turned, she caught him staring. Instead of brushing it off, she tilted her head slightly, the corners of her lips curving into a knowing smile. "You've grown so much," she said softly, her gaze sweeping over him in a way that made his pulse race. "You're not that shy little boy anymore." Daniel's ears burned. He forced a laugh, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, well, time does that to people, I guess." She chuckled again and walked past him, her presence leaving a faint trace of perfume in the air. your friend's not home yet. He had to run into town, but he'll be back soon. In the meantime, make yourself comfortable." She gestured toward the couch, but Daniel hesitated before sitting. There was something about the way she moved, the way she spoke. It made the air feel charged, heavy with an unspoken tension. He wasn't sure if he was imagining it, or if she really was looking at him differently. "So," she said, settling into a chair across from him, crossing her legs with casual elegance. "Tell me, what have you been up to all these years? College? Work?" Daniel shifted on the couch, trying not to stare. He cleared his throat. Yeah, college. Just finished my second year. It's stressful, but it's good. Keeps me busy." Her eyes lit up, and she leaned forward just slightly, resting her chin on her hand. "That's wonderful. You always were such a smart boy. I'm not surprised." The compliment shouldn't have made his chest tighten the way it did, but it did. He tried to look away, but his eyes kept finding their way back to her. The conversation continued, easy but layered, with an undercurrent he couldn't ignore. Every time she laughed, he felt it vibrate somewhere deep inside him. Every time her eyes lingered on him just a second too long, he felt his skin heat up. And then, in the middle of some small talk about his classes, she did something that froze him completely. She leaned back, casually twirling a lock of her golden hair around her finger, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smirk. Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering, as though she were silently testing him. Daniel's heart pounded. He wasn't sure if this was deliberate or if his imagination was running wild. But in that moment, standing in her living room, he realized something undeniable. This summer was not going to be like the others. Something had already begun. Daniel sat stiffly on the couch, his palms resting awkwardly on his knees. He could feel the softness of the cushions beneath him, but his body refused to relax. His eyes kept flicking toward her, and every time they did, it felt like he was walking into some invisible trap. She shifted in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. The motion was smooth, natural, but to Daniel, it seemed deliberate. His gaze betrayed him, flicking down for just a split second before he forced it back up. His ears burned with guilt, but when his eyes finally met hers again, he realized she had caught him. She didn't scold him. She didn't look offended. She just smiled. That smile, playful, knowing, hit him harder than it should have. It made him feel both like a boy again, awkward and fumbling, and like a man standing on the edge of something dangerous. "So," she said at last, her tone light, but with a hidden undertone, "are you planning to stay the whole summer?" Daniel cleared his throat. Yeah, that's the plan. Your son thought it'd be good for me, Get away for a bit, relax before the next semester." She tilted her head, studying him like he was some kind of puzzle. "Relaxing is important, though somehow I don't imagine you're the type to relax easily." He gave a short, nervous laugh. "What makes you say that?" Her eyes sparkled. "Because even now, you're sitting like you're in a job interview." Daniel blinked, then realized she was right. His posture was stiff, his hands folded together like he was waiting for judgment. Slowly, awkwardly, he leaned back into the couch, though it didn't feel any less uncomfortable under her gaze. "That's better," she said with a soft chuckle. There was a silence after that, not awkward exactly, but charged. Daniel found himself looking around the room, desperate for distraction. The framed photos caught his attention again. One in particular, a younger version of her, smiling brightly at some summer picnic, pulled at his focus. She looked almost the same, only her hair was shorter then, and her smile seemed freer somehow. "You're looking at old memories," she said suddenly, pulling him back to the present. He glanced at her, caught again, but she didn't seem bothered. If anything, she looked amused. "Yeah," he said softly. "I guess I remember that picnic. Your son and I got into a fight over who got the last slice of watermelon." Her laugh filled the room again, warm and melodic. "I remember that. You two were inseparable, always causing trouble." Daniel smiled despite himself, but the smile faded as quickly as it came. Something inside him twisted, realizing how much time had passed. He wasn't that boy anymore, and she wasn't just his friend's mom anymore. The air felt thicker. She leaned back in her chair, idly twirling her hair again. The motion seemed innocent enough, but Daniel couldn't stop noticing it. The golden strands slid effortlessly around her finger, her nails catching the light as she played with the lock. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she lifted her other hand, pressing the tip of her finger against her lips, as if lost in thought. Daniel's throat went dry. He tore his eyes away, staring at the coffee table as if it suddenly held the secrets of the universe. His mind was screaming at him to keep it together, to not read too much into her gestures. But deep down, a quieter voice whispered, "What if it isn't just you?" "Are you hungry?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Daniel blinked. No, I'm fine. Thanks." "Are you sure?" She rose gracefully from the chair, smoothing down her blouse as she did. "I was about to make something for dinner. It wouldn't be any trouble." Daniel hesitated. The idea of sitting across from her at a dinner table, just the two of them, felt dangerous. But before he could answer, she stepped closer, standing just a few feet away from him now. The faint scent of her perfume washed over him, subtle, floral, intoxicating. "You always were so polite," she said, her voice lower now, softer. "You haven't changed that much." Daniel shifted, his hand instinctively going to the back of his neck. He scratched lightly, a nervous tick he couldn't control. She noticed. Her eyes flicked to the motion, then back to his face. And again, she smiled. "Some things," she murmured, "never change." Daniel's heart pounded so loudly in his chest, he was sure she could hear it. He wanted to say something, anything, but the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. "Mom, I'm back." The voice of his best friend cut through the tension like a blade. Daniel exhaled sharply, realizing he had been holding his breath. He turned his head just as his friend walked into the living room, grocery bags in hand. "Daniel." His friend grinned. "Man, it's been forever." The two embraced briefly, the familiar comfort of friendship grounding Daniel back into reality. But as they pulled apart, Daniel's eyes flicked back to her. She was already moving toward the kitchen, her expression perfectly casual, as though nothing had happened. But Daniel knew better. Something had happened. Something subtle, invisible, but undeniable. And as he helped his friend with the groceries, he couldn't shake the feeling that this summer was already set on a course he couldn't control. That night, lying in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, Daniel replayed the moment over and over in his head. Her smile, her eyes, the way she twirled her hair, the finger pressed against her lips, the closeness when she stood by him. It was nothing, and it was everything. He turned on his side, shutting his eyes tightly, but the image of her lingered anyway. And in that lingering, he realized with a sinking, dangerous certainty, this summer was going to change everything. The next morning, sunlight poured through the half-open blinds, casting golden stripes across the guest bedroom. Daniel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous evening over and over. He could still feel the warmth of the living room, the faint scent of her perfume, the subtle tension that had lingered between them. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. "It's nothing," he told himself. "She's just your friend's mom." But as he dressed and made his way downstairs, the moment of reality hit him all over again. She was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with her usual effortless grace. The fitted blouse accentuated her figure without being overt, and the gentle curve of her shoulders caught his attention more than it should have. She hummed softly, stirring something in a bowl, and every small motion seemed to demand his notice. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, looking over her shoulder. Her smile was calm, inviting, yet carried a subtle, teasing edge. "Morning, ma'am," Daniel replied, his voice low, betraying the flutter in his chest. She laughed lightly at his formal tone. "You've still got that polite, serious streak, haven't you? I like that about you." He shifted uncomfortably, scratching the back of his neck again. Why is he so self-conscious around her, he thought. It's ridiculous. "Your friend will be back in a few minutes," she continued, placing a plate on the table. "But I thought you might like some breakfast before he comes rushing in." Daniel nodded, trying to focus on the food, though he could barely move his hands without his eyes drifting toward her. As he reached for a piece of toast, his gaze flicked upward and froze. A glimpse of skin just above her waistline, where the blouse rode slightly higher as she leaned over the counter, revealed a faint, jagged scar tracing the side of her torso. His heart skipped a beat. Daniel quickly averted his eyes, pretending to focus on buttering his toast. But curiosity and something deeper pushed him to glance again. The scar was pale, almost white against her skin, and traced a path that told a story he couldn't imagine. She turned just then, catching him staring. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled. Not a teasing smile this time, but a quiet, knowing one. "You noticed," she said softly. Daniel's mouth went dry. He opened it, closed it, tried to form words, and failed. "I guess there's no point in hiding it," she continued, leaning against the counter casually. "It's part of who I am now. It tells a story of survival, and mistakes I won't repeat." Daniel swallowed hard. He should say something. He should say something, but his mind was blank. Instead, he nodded, words failing him entirely. "Don't worry," she said, her tone gentle. "Most people notice and look away. You didn't. That says something." He tried a nervous laugh. I didn't mean to." She raised a hand, stopping him. "Shh. It's okay. Really, you're not the first to be curious, and you won't be the last. But it's different when someone notices without judgment." Daniel's stomach twisted. There was something in her eyes, vulnerability, strength, and a quiet power that left him unsteady. He felt a strange pull toward her, an unspoken tension that made his hands shake slightly. She smiled again, softer this time, and turned back to the stove. Her movements were casual, yet every detail, the way she moved, The curve of her shoulders, the delicate handling of the utensils, seemed to imprint itself in his mind. Daniel struggled to focus on his breakfast. Every sound, the clinking of a spoon against a bowl, the faint rustle of her clothes, the soft hum of the morning felt amplified. His pulse raced, and his fingers tapped nervously against the table. "You're quiet this morning," she said without turning around. "Is something on your mind?" He hesitated. "Can I say it out loud? Should I?" He decided against it. "Just thinking, I guess." Her voice softened. "Well, if you're thinking about that scar, don't worry. It's not scary. It's just part of life, and part of me." Daniel nodded again, unable to meet her gaze directly. Instead, he focused on the golden light spilling through the blinds, feeling the weight of something he couldn't name pressing in his chest. The front door opened again. His friend had returned, carrying a small bag from the store. "Hey, I got the snacks you asked for," he said, dropping them on the counter. The moment shifted. Daniel's tension eased slightly as his friend chatted casually, unaware of the undercurrent in the kitchen. But Daniel couldn't forget the sight, couldn't forget the scar, couldn't forget the quiet strength she radiated. Throughout breakfast, her attention was gentle but precise. She asked questions, laughed at their small jokes, and moved around the kitchen with effortless grace. And Daniel, despite his best efforts, couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made every nerve in his body tingle. After clearing the table, she turned to him, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Would you like to see the garden? I can show you the new greenhouse. It's interesting." Daniel felt a flicker of excitement, tempered by nervous anticipation. "Sure, I'd like that." As they stepped outside, the morning sun warmed his back, and he noticed the subtle sway of her movements, the confidence in each step. She walked a little ahead, glancing back now and then, as if gauging his attention. And Daniel's gaze kept finding her, sometimes deliberately, sometimes accidentally, but always returning to the same place. Her face, her figure, the quiet authority she carried without effort. In the garden, the rows of vibrant flowers and the delicate greenhouse filled with exotic plants seemed almost secondary to him. His eyes kept drifting toward her hands as she pointed out the different species, her fingers brushing against the petals gently. "You have a real talent for this," he said finally, trying to break the tension he felt coiling inside him. She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "It's calming, and it keeps me busy, keeps my mind focused." Daniel nodded, though he couldn't quite shake the tension. He felt both intrigued and intimidated, drawn in and cautious at the same time. There was something unspoken in the way she looked at him, in the casual gestures and quiet smiles that made him aware of every detail. The way her hair caught the sunlight, the curve of her posture, the subtle strength in her presence. And in that moment, Daniel realized something dangerous. He was no longer seeing her as just his friend's mother. He was seeing her fully, as a woman, as a person, as someone with layers he could barely comprehend. The morning stretched on, full of small conversations, laughter, and quiet moments. And every time he glanced at her, Daniel felt the pull stronger, the tension building. Something had shifted between them, subtly but undeniably. By the time they returned to the house, Daniel's mind was a swirl of emotions: curiosity, nervousness, admiration, and a growing, unspoken tension that left him breathless. He knew, deep down, that this summer would be unlike any other. Something had begun, a silent, irresistible current that neither of them could yet name, but which promised to change everything. The rain started quietly at first, tapping softly against the windows, then gradually growing into a steady, insistent patter. Daniel watched from the living room as water streamed down the glass, blurring the garden outside into a watercolor of green and gray. He had never liked storms much, but tonight the sound had a strange, calming effect, wrapping the house in a cocoon of warmth and intimacy. He was supposed to be relaxing after a long day, but his mind refused to settle. Every glance at her, the subtle arch of her brow, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, the gentle curve of her lips when she smiled, kept him on edge. "You've been quiet all day," she said suddenly, appearing in the doorway of the living room, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. Her hair had loosened since the morning, falling freely around her face in soft waves. She wore a comfortable sweater that clung to her form in all the right places, paired with soft lounge pants. Daniel's pulse raced instantly, though he tried not to show it. Just thinking," he mumbled, taking one of the mugs. The warmth seeped into his hands, grounding him slightly, though it didn't calm the flutter in his chest. She smiled knowingly and sat across from him on the couch, crossing her legs. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing soft shadows across the room, and the combination of warmth, dim light, and rain outside created a strange, almost hypnotic atmosphere. "So," she began, stirring her cocoa lazily, "what are you thinking about?" Daniel hesitated. He knew he should keep it casual, keep it friendly, keep the distance appropriate. But something about the way she looked at him, the gentle curiosity in her eyes, the slight tilt of her head, made it difficult to focus on anything else. "Just school," he said finally. "And stuff. You know, life." She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him swallow hard. "Life, huh? That's a big topic for a quiet evening by the fire." He laughed nervously. "Yeah, I guess it is." There was a pause. The fire crackled, the rain fell, and for a moment, the room existed only in the 2 of them. She sipped her cocoa slowly, eyes never leaving his. Daniel felt exposed under her gaze, yet oddly safe-like. He could reveal more than he ever had, and she wouldn't judge him. "I've always wondered," she said softly, setting her mug down, "what you're looking for. Not in school, not in your studies, but in life, in a person." Daniel blinked. The question caught him off guard. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to answer or how much to reveal. But her expression, open, genuine, and yet subtly flirtatious, made it difficult to hide. I don't know," he admitted. "Someone special. Someone I can trust. Someone who understands me." She leaned back slightly, her gaze lingering on him, thoughtful. Trust, understanding, like those are rare. More rare than people realize. Daniel's stomach tightened. There was something in her tone, warm, inviting, a touch teasing, that made him aware of the closeness between them. He shifted slightly on the couch, noticing for the first time just how close their legs were without thinking about it. She sipped her cocoa again, then set the mug down, leaning just enough to let her hand brush slightly against his as she reached across the small coffee table. The touch was accidental or maybe intentional, but it sent a jolt through him. He cleared his throat, looking away quickly, feeling his face flush. "You're quiet again," she observed softly, thinking about what just happened. Daniel froze, unsure if he should answer. She had that playful spark in her eyes, a knowing glint that made it impossible to lie convincingly. Maybe, he admitted finally, his voice low. Her lips curved into a smile, subtle, teasing. "Good. You should think sometimes. About yourself. About what you want. About connections." Daniel's eyes flicked to the fire, then back to her. He could feel the tension growing between them, unspoken yet palpable. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the way she traced the rim of her mug with her fingers, the way the firelight danced across her features, drew him in, pulling him closer without either of them making a word of it explicit. She leaned slightly forward, resting her elbow on her knee, her gaze locked onto his. "You know," she murmured, "I've always felt there's something special about you. Something I recognized long ago, even before you were this grown-up version of yourself." Daniel's heart raced. He could barely process her words. The subtle flirtation, the attention, the warmth. It was intoxicating. He shifted again, this time unconsciously leaning a little closer. She didn't move away. In fact, she tilted her head slightly, letting her hair fall across her shoulder, exposing the curve of her neck. He swallowed, suddenly acutely aware of every detail. The softness of her lips, the depth of her eyes, the inviting warmth of her presence. For a long moment, they simply sat there, the fire crackling, the rain falling, the world outside forgotten. Words felt unnecessary. The tension, the closeness, the unspoken attraction, all of it filled the room like a tangible thing. Finally, she broke the silence. "You've grown into quite the young man, Daniel. I can see it now, more than I ever did when you were a boy." He flushed, looking down at his cocoa, unsure how to respond. "Thanks," he muttered, voice barely audible. She reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. The touch was brief, but electric. Daniel's pulse jumped, and he felt his stomach tighten. "I like seeing this side of you," she whispered, leaning back slightly, a mischievous glint returning to her eyes. "The thoughtful, quiet side. It's different, interesting, hard to resist." Daniel's throat went dry. He wanted to speak, to respond, to say something, anything, but the words stuck. He just nodded, aware of the heat rising to his face, aware of the intensity of her gaze, aware of how close they were in the dim firelight. And in that moment, Daniel realized the dynamics between them had shifted irreversibly. There was a tension now, a silent acknowledgement that neither could deny, and it made every heartbeat, every glance, every small movement between them feel electric. The rain outside continued to fall. The fire continued to crackle. And inside the room, something new had begun. A connection, charged and dangerous, that neither Daniel nor her could ignore. The fire's glow filled the room with soft, flickering light, painting shadows across the walls. Rain pounded against the windows, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the rapid beat of Daniel's heart. He sat on the couch, the mug of cocoa warming his hands, yet he barely noticed the heat. All his attention was on her. She had moved closer to the hearth, settling into the armchair opposite him. Her posture was relaxed, casual, yet every movement seemed deliberate. The slight tilt of her head, the way she leaned forward to stir her cocoa, the curve of her fingers around the mug. Daniel shifted, trying to find a comfortable position, but he was acutely aware of the space between them. It wasn't just physical, it was electric. Every glance, every subtle gesture seemed charged with something unspoken. "You've been quiet since breakfast," she murmured, her voice soft, intimate. "You're thinking, aren't you?" He nodded, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, just thinking." She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and leaned slightly forward. The movement brought her closer in his line of sight. He noticed the curve of her shoulders, the gentle sway as she adjusted herself. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay still. "You know," she continued, "I've always felt you were different, even when you were a boy. You had this, something I can't quite describe." Daniel's throat went dry. He wanted to deny it, to say it wasn't true, but the sincerity in her eyes stopped him. Instead, he merely nodded, unable to form words that would convey his own growing awareness of her presence. She placed her mug on the small table beside her chair, and for a moment there was silence, just the crackle of the fire and the steady patter of rain. Then she shifted slightly, leaning forward, her gaze fixed on him. Daniel could feel the tension building, an almost tangible force pulling him closer, though he didn't move. Her eyes held his, searching, playful, and there was a spark of something more, an invitation hidden in the warmth of her smile. "You know, Daniel," she whispered, "sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if things had been different back then." He blinked, confused. "Different? How?" She leaned back, letting a strand of hair fall across her shoulder. Then, with a subtle movement, she twirled it around her finger, just like she had the day before. Her other hand lifted, her finger brushing lightly against her lips. A playful, teasing gesture that made Daniel's chest tighten. "I mean," she murmured, "if circumstances were different, maybe I would have noticed you sooner. Maybe. We wouldn't be bound by the same rules, the same expectations." Daniel felt heat rush to his face. He looked down at his hands, pretending to adjust the mug, but he was acutely aware of every detail: the soft glow of the fire on her skin, the curve of her lips, the subtle tilt of her head. "Daniel," she said softly, leaning a little closer. Her voice was gentle, intimate, almost hypnotic. "Do you ever feel that pull? That sense that some things are meant to be noticed, in a way that goes beyond just friendship?" He swallowed hard. I think, maybe." Her eyes softened, and she leaned slightly forward, closing a fraction of the distance between them. The warmth from the fire kissed their faces, the faint scent of her perfume enveloping him. Daniel's pulse thundered in his chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She lifted her hand slowly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. The touch was deliberate, lingering just enough to make him shiver. "See," she murmured, voice low, teasing. "Some things are impossible to ignore." Daniel's breath caught. He wanted to speak, but no words came. His gaze met hers, and in that instant, the tension between them became almost unbearable. He felt drawn to her, yet unsure, aware that every second, every gesture was shifting the boundaries between them. Then, almost imperceptibly, she crossed one leg, letting her knee gently brush his thigh. It was subtle, casual, but Daniel's body reacted instantly. He swallowed, his heart racing. The line between innocent conversation and something more had blurred. She smiled, noticing the reaction. "You're thinking a lot tonight, Daniel," she said softly. "Thinking about what could happen, what shouldn't, what might be inevitable." He nodded slowly, unable to deny it. The firelight danced across her features, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek, the sparkle in her eyes, the warmth that seemed to radiate from her very being. She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbow on her knee, her chin in her hand. Their faces were close now, close enough that Daniel could see the subtle movement of her lips, the faint pulse at her temple, the way her eyes held his with quiet intensity. "You know," she whispered, "I've always found you intriguing. Even back then, I sensed something special about you, something that draws me in." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but he was speechless. Instead, he shifted slightly, leaning just a fraction closer. She didn't pull away. The room was silent except for the fire, the rain, and the soft, unspoken tension between them. Every glance, every subtle movement, every whispered word heightened the connection. Finally, she leaned back just slightly, letting out a soft sigh. "I don't usually do this," she admitted, her voice intimate and honest. "I don't usually draw attention like this. But there's something about you, something I can't ignore." Daniel felt his heart hammering in his chest. The words, the gaze, the presence. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. He realized with a mix of fear and desire that this moment had changed everything. The fire crackled, the rain fell, and in that quiet, charged space, something new had begun. A connection, undeniable and forbidden, stretching the boundaries of what was acceptable, drawing them closer in ways neither could resist. And as he watched her, her eyes glinting with playful mischief and quiet longing, Daniel knew with absolute certainty this summer would be unlike any other.